Awesome. Here we go. Awesome. Okay, guys, welcome to the meeting. Sorry that we had a little bit of a slow start with getting it all set up and ready to go. Could we have someone start with a prayer? Nick, will you start us with a prayer? Can you hear me?
Yeah, there we go.
Cool.
Is that better?
Cool. Awesome. Hey, Amira, can you start us off with a prayer?
Sure. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for having this opportunity to gather together and to be united and to strengthen each other, to learn from each other. And we thank you for the gospel in our lives to have this opportunity to continue study and obtain knowledge and to help those around us and to serve and to give the example of our Savior. And as we learn that we make progression, we go to the Savior too. And we say this humbly in the name of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Awesome. Thank you so much. So I thought that this week's was kind of interesting. Not what I was expecting for sure. And so I'm just going to pull this up really quick. So this whole week was we were studying about NASA, right? Can someone give me like a brief little synopsis of what this whole thing was about?
Well, it was Columbus. Columbus, yeah. It was pretty much, it was a disaster, and unfortunately, that included, the death of some people, and as I read more, and I saw everything that was going on throughout the days, people going back and forward, and engineers and companies, and I believe they didn't set up well a good plan from the beginning. And I think it's funny how they gave the example of the challenge and what had happened, and why didn't people brought it up and why wasn't nothing done even before that, so nothing ever would happen again, and I just think it was bad communication, bad set up from the beginning, and they just needed to work more together.
Yeah, for sure. I remember reading through this exactly like you were saying at the beginning and just being kind of shocked at how many of these people had kind of prestigious job titles, and they were making rookie mistakes, things that for something so big like this, like a space shuttle, like you can't afford to mess up. There's billions of dollars that go into these things. So the next question first question that I'd like to bring out, it says, what is human cognitive bias or basis, and how does it apply to this case?
What was the question? One more time, sorry.
Right. It says, right here. Actually, I don't know if I like that question fully.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure how to answer it.
Yeah. No, it was kind of weird. Let me bring up another one. When did the problems with Columbia begin? Let's just start with that one. Start at the beginning.
I think it started just from the beginning of the shuttle. They said that they were so confident in the shuttle being reliable and perfect that they didn't put any safety measures or escape plans, and just the design of it just didn't seem like it was from the beginning a very good design to me. And then just with the foam strikes, they knew it was a problem and just never addressed it. So I think it all started kind of from the beginning.
Yeah.
And I think if I can add to it, I think it was also the budget cuts. If I'm correct, I think they did some budget cuts, and I think that also, with the material, like you were saying, Cody, with the foams, and I think the deadlines, they wanted to push even more out, and they have deadlines that was coming, I believe, from the White House too, that they wanted results, they wanted to see things, and with the budget cuts, I think it added all of it on top of what you said.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, there were budget cuts. I think you're right, Yamara.
For
Yeah.
sure.
Kind of going off of both of those comments, I think NASA also kind of screwed up long before the Columbia accident. It talked a little bit about the Challenger mission and how they kind of had developed a habit of kind of like a Russian roulette style of business, where they're kind of like thinking, like with the O-rings, for example, with the Challenger, they're saying how, yeah, it probably won't work at that temperature, but let's just go for it anyways. Like, just like minor things like that they were just letting happen. And they got lucky with the Challenger, so they assume that they can keep getting away with tiny little risks like that with the Columbia mission, but obviously it didn't end up working out. So I think they just kind of got into a bad habit earlier, way before the Columbia mission was probably even thought of.
They kind of continue to push their luck, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's like it's on such minor things that, you know, obviously it didn't work out too well with the Columbia mission.
Yeah, I was laughing at the end when they're like, oh yeah, there's no way that foam, like they were still in denial after everything had happened. And I was shocked because at the end, they were almost like too proud to admit that they had slipped up on so many little things. And they're like, oh, like there's still no way that the foam could have done that. And it's like, what?
Yeah.
You guys are still like so too proud to come down, and like they didn't want to fall down with the Columbia, although it had already failed.
Yeah. And it just all, I mean, the first mention it makes of mistakes like that is with the O-rings on the Challenger. So probably happened before that, but I think that's the first case you can kind of see from the study where that led to the tragedy.
Sure. It says here, why did the debris strikes become an acceptable risk? We kind of talked about that. They just like, they got a little, I guess,
The best.
I don't know, yeah, they got a little relaxed with the Challenger, and so they thought that they could do it again. Does anyone have any other thoughts of why they think that they thought it was acceptable to just take some of those risks, especially for those debris strikes?
I think it's a lot like what Nick was saying. They kept getting away with it, and they said, "Oh, well, you know, it worked this time. I'm sure it'll work again," and just kept going off of luck.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing has
Yeah.
happened yet, so just keep going.
Yeah. They had, I think it was like, it's happened, I can't remember the statistics, but it was like they had 70 times or something that foam debris had hit their space shuttles and didn't do anything. So they were looking at the percentages and the likelihood of it actually being, you know, anything of danger to the crew was very low considering how often it happened, but there still was obviously that chance. So I think that's why they didn't really care too much.
For sure.
Yeah, I was just going to say it was really surprising to me. Like, I think of NASA, I think of just like a well-built company, like just this operating tyrant of like business and how things should be. And you would think that like these little details would not be prevalent. So I was thinking about like what companies do I interact with on a daily basis that has these types of faults right now, maybe that they don't fully realize, and that I think they're just like, you know, they have everything together. So NASA is not a company that I would think would miss this type of stuff. So it was pretty mind-boggling to see those little missteps.
Do you think that Cody has anything to do with the culture of NASA? Like we have like a set, like you were saying, that NASA is something super, super big, and so they must be like this really well-oiled machine. But do you think that their culture of their company has anything to do with that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that, the quote that keeps coming to my head is like, you know, it's not rocket science that these things would happen. I mean, they are literally rocket scientists here. So it's really interesting to think about that. But yeah, like I think that as a company, they think big. They think that they're over maybe some of the details, and they, as a culture, have developed a habit of overlooking those little small things. Like there was a part where, I'm trying to find it here. Like Roger argued that the shuttle's O-rings might not perform well at low temperatures, and he was not able to present a case. The data they felt was a little jumbled, and so they kind of just disregarded his thought. Like that's a culture of like, okay, we've presented something and we're not fully going to look into it. We're just going to disregard as like, oh, like this person didn't do a good enough job of convincing me, so we're just not going to like even think about it. We're going to kind of move forward. So I think that's evidence of a culture that's looking past the details and getting a little too proud in what they do.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that that they did push aside so many things. I mean, if I acted like that in my life of just, oh, if I don't address the issue, then it doesn't exist and it's not there. That's kind of what their attitude was throughout the entire Columbia experience, right? They were just thinking, oh, well, if I don't think about this, if I just push it aside, then it must not exist, which is like total garbage. But cool. So one part that I thought was really interesting and something that they have us focus a lot in case studies is to make sure we come up with conclusions, right, of what we would improve, how would we improve the company. And so in my case study write-up, I spent a lot of time trying to focus a little bit more on a little bit like what process I would improve for these people. So do you guys have any thoughts or anything that you would do to improve NASA, saying as if they were still working on the Columbia and you're thinking, okay, this is what I'm going to do to improve the situation so that there's better communication, that little details are not being mixed up or missed. Is there like a process that you guys thought would be most beneficial for NASA at that time?
For me, I came up with an agenda. Have an agenda where you have a checklist of everything, that you need to have from all the departments, because not only you have so many departments still, in the hands in there. And I think have every department, have an agenda, check on it, and then meet, and then have from each department, and then meet from each department, and then have that agenda checked to make sure that everything is okay. I mean, that's a start for me. And, even double check things, have a communication. Who are the people that you need to talk to and train them correctly too? Because I believe like the simple one was the cameras, where they have 5 days it took them for the respond and looking at them and not sending to the correct people or not have the right authority to receive information. That for me, there was like a lack of communication from there. Having that training of who you communicate with.
Yeah, definitely. I put together a process as well. I think that's a really great idea. Having an agenda sort of thing is really important. But something that I put together was even just having like like the main communication specialist in each company within each organization of NASA would not only benefit but be crucial, right? So meaning the process that I put together would be like, let's say for the cameras, that if someone said, hey, we need these cameras to be, from one organization to another, we need these cameras to be set up at these angles with, these certain kinds of people, that they communicate that to the next organization. And there's like one person. So like if you want to say something and you need something from another organization, you go to your main communicator and they talk to the next communicator and the next organization and be like the task manager, right? Someone who can get the tasks all put together and keep people liable and actually, kind of push and move people forward. And then once those are done, then they go back to the communicator and that communicator talks to the other organization. Am I making any sense?
Yeah,
I just think that, communication is literally everything when it comes to companies. And so when I was reading this, I was kind of flabbergasted that it was NASA and there wasn't some sort of system to make sure that tasks were completed. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was thinking exactly along those same lines. it seemed kind of ridiculous how big of an ordeal it was to get a couple of, camera angles on the launch. I understand that NASA was facing budget cuts, that they couldn't have, their own equipment, but maybe they don't necessarily need to invest in a lot of cameras, but they do need to make it so it's not such a huge, long, drawn-out process to obtain footage of their launches. So that's something that I definitely had thought of, and I think you described the process of how they should do it much better than I could. But I totally agree with that.
Would anyone do anything to improve a process or make that make that better? Because that really is something that the whole thing was communication, in my opinion. Or does someone have a different aspect on that?
I think adding also, because from what I understood, they didn't have the Tiger team by that mission. They had it at the Challenger, I believe, previously, but they didn't have the Tiger team. They didn't have anybody that would work for the emergency cases, And like you said, that would be somebody that in the Tiger team that they have all those information who to communicate with, and keep on hand to know what they need to do and work on those stress moments or emergency that they need somebody, who to contact with directly, like you said. And that would probably would be the Tiger team, I think it was called, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
For sure. So would you say that their program or everything that they did for Columbia, would you say that it was more of an experimental thing, or was it an actual operation?
I think it was both. I think they kind of went along with both of them. We have this project to do, but hey, let's try this too. Let's see what works. And I think now they find out. And unfortunately, in this kind of event, but I think it would have to do a little bit of both.
For sure. Awesome. So let's reach in a little further then into some of the people that played the main roles to the mission failure then. Who were the main people that were included into this case study?
I can't think of the guy's name that was supposed to get the photos. He said they asked to get those like day 2, and he waited like 5 days to get them. And the ones he requested them, NASA canceled them just because they didn't know who had requested them. He didn't do it in a timely manner. I think that was just another failure of communication on their part as well.
Yeah, for sure. So going back through some of these names, does anyone remember some of these names?
All I remember was, I think his name was Rocha. His last name was Rocha, and he seemed like he was the only person who was trying to play it safe, and he seemed kind of like he would have been the hero if they had listened to him.
Mm-hmm.
But the other guys, I can't remember their name, but
I think Hales was supposed to get the photos, and I agree with Nick with Rocha. It seemed like he was on top of it.
Yeah. When going through, I'm on flight day number 5, like 2 or 3 paragraphs down. It says, Ham also noted weaknesses in the flight rationale for a prior flight, which had to address substantial tile damage caused by foam strikings. So again, going back to foam strikings in the preceding missions. It goes on and continues talking about how he had noticed several times through different flights that this wasn't going well and that it wasn't going to improve at all. It also talks about Hale. We talked about him. Rocha wrote an angry, scathing email. It says, when reading that email, what did you guys find effective in how he presented his case.
I think did he ever send that email? Because didn't it say something like he only showed it to some of the employees, something like that? And I can't
Yeah,
remember. Yeah, he only showed it to some people. And so I thought, well, he wrote it, but then he didn't send it. And I think it wasn't in the best way either. The way that he went about also, and he could have sent it to people who really needed it and specify more, probably.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. When reading, so I'm just going to read parts of this email, and I want you guys to think about, yeah, I don't think he sent it. He did show it to people, but he didn't show it, or he didn't send it. But when reading through this, you guys could listen to and rethink of ways that you would have rewritten this email so that he would feel comfortable sending it, and what difference that might have made in the Columbia flight mission. It says, in my humble technical opinion, this is wrong and bordering on irresponsible. Answer not to the request additional imaging help from my outside source. I must emphasize again, the severe enough damage could potentially present grave hazards. So what would you guys change within that email to make it so that he could be heard, but also wouldn't be, I guess, looked down poorly upon it?
I think it was well written. I didn't really see it being like an angry email. I think he's just concerned and knew that things were going to happen. But I didn't take it as like an angry email, at least the way I read it.
Yeah, I didn't take it as an angry email either. The reason why I don't think that's necessarily angry is because if you think about what was at stake, like there was $1 billion project in the air with lives. Like I don't think you could possibly not be like, you have to use passionate wording like that in order to get your point across, for the seriousness of the mission. So I think, now, I didn't think about this at first, but now I'm just thinking that Rocha guy is probably regretting not sending that. He probably feels like, dang, I'm such a coward for just showing this to people around me, and I didn't have the courage to send it out to, the people above me because I was fearful for my job. I bet you he would much rather have known that he could have saved some lives than to know that he had job security or whatever. So just something I thought about.
Yeah. The only way I could have seen him improving that email, I mean, apart from, of course, actually sending it, there weren't a lot of facts that were in it that would bring, would pique interest. It was just kind of, in my technical opinion, and that's all he really said. But if he had, I guess, brought some more concrete, hard facts into it, as to why he thought that way, in like human form, so like in human vernacular, so that it's not like his tech lingo, but that people in other departments could understand it. I think that would have been a helpful thing as well.
He could have been more direct and firm. Doesn't mean he will be angry about it, but just a little bit more direct about it. As soon as he started with being humble, when he said that, he could have said my professional instead. And like you said, add also, more facts to it. And so he just a little bit more direct and firm about it. But polite.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Let's see. Okay, so who in your guys' opinion is accountable for the mission failure?
I don't know. That's a hard question to answer. I'd say a little bit of everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the culture of you need to prove the burden of proof was in this culture. The barrier to get across something had to be there was so much data that you would have to put together to be able to prove that something was wrong, and that seemed to be like a cultural norm. So like in this instance of Rocha, he felt like, it's not going to make it very far, and there's more data that needs to be put together for this to have any type of merit. So I think the culture is there. There's the company as a whole, like the way that's fostered. So who's responsible for the culture and like opening up, communication channels? Like that's I think the question, because one, like Rocha should take ownership of that, just because we were just talking about that, of he should speak his mind regardless if he thinks something is wrong, rather than blaming the culture. But the culture, those people that are the ones managing that culture and the ones who have the most influence, like I think they're to blame for creating this company where you don't speak up unless you have an incredible amount of data, and so you feel like you can't voice any type of opinion, even when that opinion could lead to more investigation, from just opening up and listening to something. So
how, in your guys' experience then, would this apply into our daily lives, I guess, as we go out and help other companies improve? What are some of the lessons to take from this?
I think just like we've talked about in the past, just communication and knowing who needs to communicate to who, maybe like a chain of command, and know who's in charge of the projects. And like maybe like you said, there are so many different groups, having one person and have one spokesperson. Communication seems like the biggest thing.
Any other thoughts? I agree with you, Cody. I think that's great. What personal life things and lessons can we take from the fact that they just kind of ignored all the small details?
One important thing that I think I learned and I want to apply to my life, from kind of what I've learned about Rocha, is that if you have a strong opinion about something, you shouldn't be afraid to voice it. Like, I don't know. I just think it's huge. Sometimes I think we can be more afraid of what others might think about our opinion, that we just feel like we don't need to express it. But a lot of times, our opinions really do matter, and that even if we're wrong, I think it's still important for us to voice it, at least at first.
Yeah, for sure. I felt really grateful to stop and realize, I guess there's like a lot of reasons that, I don't know, like task management in general, I think is something that is often ignored within big companies. And I would always want to make sure that no matter what my position is in the future, whether it's just being a stay-at-home entrepreneur or whether it is within a big company, that no matter what, that I stop and I recognize to take care of the little things as well, and to be detail-oriented. I felt with a lot of these people that they were not as detail-oriented, and because of it, it led to a whole chaos of little problems that led into a giant problem. And I felt like that was a consistent thing throughout the entire case study, and something that I would like to apply to make sure that I'm detail oriented, but I also push along at the same time. So anyway, I thought that was just something that I feel like I could bring on as well. It says here, let's see. What was the recovery window in this case? It says hint, time between when the problem of the foam strike was discovered after launch to the day that Columbia exploded. So these people spent a lot of time trying to recover with like adding another delay, or like not putting another flight in, or sorry, not putting not launching that day. Like they extended their flight days like a lot. How do you think that they could have improved on doing that?
What I was thinking is, I mean, the damage is done. They're in outer space. Is there anything that they could have really done to fix the problem at that point? I mean, it's not like they can send up another shuttle with a repairman to patch it.
So,
I think they would have been able to fix it. I mean, it's not for sure. I'm definitely not a rocket scientist, but I would imagine that they were prepared for events like this. And because it was a 16-day mission, I believe. And so the fact that the mission went smoothly for 99%
Yeah.
of the time goes to show that the damage really wasn't that significant. So that caused me to believe that the NASA guys would have come up with some way to fix something minor like that in space. But from reading the case, you learn that they had all sorts of different missions up in space that they were trying to accomplish, and that taking the time to have one of the astronauts go out and fix the wing damage would have compromised one of those missions. It would have taken up time. And so that's why they didn't want to have any astronauts go and fix any of the damages, because they were so focused on the missions that they were scheduled to accomplish.
cool. Also, with going off of this, it says, what principles, if any, from this lesson or from this lesson's readings apply to this case? So from the readings that we had this week, what principles apply to this case study?
So I think it goes back to communication, and sometimes we doubt ourselves, if we know what we're gonna say, it matters to other people or it does make a difference. But, just like, next day we need to give our opinion no matter what, and and just to be able to know to effectively communicate with other people and express our concerns or issues that we have.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I liked, so I read the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People a couple times, but that was part of our reading these last few weeks. Do you think that there are any principles that come from reading the seven Habits of Highly Effective People that would have applied and would have prevented these issues had they followed some of these good habits from that book?
I think the principle of seeking first to understand, then to be understood. Like, what a beautiful thing that would be if that was the cultural norm. Like, speaking from personal experience, like I think when people are listening with the intention to understand rather than the intention to then get their point across, like I think that's an important principle. I think here we see a culture within NASA of people that did not want to understand or give time for other people. They wanted to do their own thing until they were heavily, heavily proven otherwise. So seek first to understand, then to be understood, I think is a principle that could apply here.
Yeah.
They were really into themselves, I think, and they're not worried about other people, or they just, I don't know, wanted to credit and just, they could have taken more time, upon the other departments.
So this might be a little bit of a stretch, but I remember towards the beginning of the book, it talked about before we start climbing up a ladder, we should make sure that it's leaning up against the right wall. This might be a stretch, but it kind of seems like NASA was being so focused on doing certain tasks that were definitely important, but they kind of ended up neglecting some major things that they should have been focusing on. They should have been leaning their ladder probably up against the wall of making sure that the Columbia would be able to land safely back onto Earth. But instead, they're more focused on going up the ladder on a different wall. So, just something that popped in my mind.
Something that I think that they did really well with, well, habit number 2 of that book is begin with the end in mind. And, you know, their intention really was to build a rocket, right, or to build the spaceship, the Columbia. And so they did have that in mind, but something that I think that they probably could have used as well from that book is habit number 1, which was to be proactive. A lot of times they would assign someone to do something, and no one would really know where it came from and would be really confused as to what their purpose was with it, and then just kind of brush it aside. And so I think that being proactive would have been really helpful for them to push through and see, I guess, that they can, if they were going to follow through on a task, is what I'm saying, make sure that they spent like special contact with another individual from a different department. That might have helped a bit. Cool. Awesome. So then there was read the introduction from Drawing the Line. Did anyone get a chance to read that?
From the 7 Habits, or the new books that we're reading?
I'm just.
I read some of it.
What was that?
The new book.
Mm-hmm.
It's a new one, I believe.
Yeah. Did anyone get the chance to read that a little bit?
I think it's the new one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I had a chance to read just a little bit of it, and the book is called Drawing the Line, and pretty much just knowing when to say no and how to go about doing that, and drawing lines for yourself.
I was able to read some of it.
Sorry, you keep breaking in and out, Cody. What did you say?